Thank you very much. To give the wait staff a chance to clean up and bring you dessert, why don't we take 15 more minutes, and then we'll get Bob up here, who will have a slightly different perspective. So enjoy your...
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for what you do, and thanks to Gene Sperling for that very gracious extended introduction. As Monty Python used to say, and now for something completely different. I want to take you back to 1975. That's 34 years ago, when I was a very young Senate investigator, and my boss handed me a file called redlining. And the next day, there appeared in my office Gail Sincata and Monsignor Gino Baroni and a cast of dozens. And they laid out an extraordinary story of tenacity and intelligence and principle and organizing. And their story was, we have these banks who siphon money out of our communities and don't put money back in, who work with predatory lenders to do racial steering and block busting. And all we would like from the federal government is disclosure regulations so that we don't have to research what they're up to one deed at a time, but so that they are required to disclose where they're making their loans. And I was blown away. I mean, this was public policy bubbling up from the people. This was what I later called regulation as an organizing tool. And they invented the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. And we had a leader in Senator Proxmire, who was a very astute legislative tactician, and we just barely had the votes to get the thing through Congress over the strenuous objections of every regulatory agency of what was then the Ford administration and every trade association in the financial industry. We got one young banker to testify in favor of it, a guy named Grzewinski, who went on to great things at Shore Bank. And then we said, hey, we got a coalition here, let's do it again. And we thought a little bit bigger, and the result was the Community Reinvestment Act. I did not dream that when we passed that law that the result would be a gathering such as this room, an organization such as NCRC, and not only that, but a whole generation of bankers who would imbibe the values of community reinvestment. So it really did turn out to be regulation as empowerment, not some bureaucrat in Washington, but rather a strategy that gave ordinary people the tools to serve as a counterweight to some of the most powerful banks and concentrations of wealth in the country. So, so God bless you. And one of the nicest things that happened to me in my career was the opportunity, just by dumb luck, to be president in that room on that day in January of 1975. But the real work has been done by all of you and continues to be done by all of you. Now, a crisis is an opportunity, and the bad news is that this is a bigger opportunity than we hoped for. I worry that although we have an extraordinary president in Barack Obama, who has both the great intelligence that comes from one who's been a law professor and the down-home sensibility of someone who's been a community organizer, and an extraordinary story of personal character, that he's getting some dubious advice. And I worry that even Barack Obama is not thinking big enough. So there are there are three things he has to do. He has to spend even more public money that goes directly to Main Street, not that goes to Wall Street first. He has to get the banking rescue done properly, and he has to get the housing rescue done properly. If he fails on even one of those, it will ruin the economy, and by extension will ruin his presidency and will ruin the promise to reclaim a just society. Now let me start with the stimulus package. Yeah, $800 billion is a lot of money, but if the context is a recession where, as this morning's papers reported, citing the latest Federal Reserve statistics, American households lost $11 trillion last year in the value of their homes and in the value of their 401ks and other stock holdings. It's not so much money. In fact, it's about 2.5% of GDP per year for 2 years. And if the economy is declining at 6%, 6.2% in the last quarter, it'll be more like 8% or 10% this year. It's not nearly enough. I'll give you a very graphic example. $140 billion of the stimulus package goes to state and local governments who are suffering huge losses in their revenue, causing layoffs and suspensions of public services. $140 billion. The only problem is state and local governments are going to be out about $450 billion. So it's about a third of what we need. I worry that the banking rescue is being done through the wrong end of the telescope. It's channeling all the help through the banks instead of putting the money into communities so that we can make the banks whole by making the assets that they hold whole. And of course that connects directly to the housing rescue, which is a little more promising than the banking rescue, but it's too small, and its architecture is much too complicated. I am one of those who thinks, with you, that the right way to do this is through write-downs and ideally through the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was invented by Roosevelt to use direct federal borrowing at the Treasury rate of about 3% to refinance mortgages and write down their value if necessary, and not go through these convoluted series of steps whose main purpose seems to be to subsidize banks and hope that some of the money trickles down to homeowners. And this is not just a matter of preferring a more radical step. It's a concern that if you do this by trying to help bondholders and help banks and work out complicated agreements one at a time, it won't get the job done. If it got the job done, I could live with it, even though it subsidized a lot of rich people along the way. But my fear is that it will fail, and if it fails, Obama fails, and if he fails, we fail. So he has to get all of this right. And I think if you look at what caused this crisis, it was caused by too much deregulation that was colluded in by both parties. And my friend Gene Sperling can stand here and bemoan what AIG was allowed to do with credit default swaps, but I can say this just among close friends. It was the Clinton administration that kneecapped a regulator named Brooksley Bourne, who wanted to take a much harder line with credit default swaps and prevented the kind of regulation going forward that would have prevented this. And both parties' fingerprints are on the kind of needless deregulation and failure to enforce laws that were on the books that caused this mess. So the other thing we need is a drastic simplification of the whole banking system. To listen to the defenders of securitization, you would think that nobody ever got a loan before 1975. And let me remind you that securitization was invented not because there was a huge hunger to buy these bonds, but because middlemen saw a way of making a lot of money. And they invented a doomsday machine. They invented a machine that nobody really understood, that nobody regulated. They did a lot of lobbying to make sure that it wouldn't be regulated, lest that cut into the fees. And this doomsday machine has taken down the whole economy. And if I understand Mr. Kuttner's plan, the plan is to use money from the Treasury, which leverages additional money from the Federal Reserve to guarantee the upside of profits by hedge funds and private equity companies, which are the two least transparent, most unregulated parts of the system, so that they will put money in and buy the securities so that banks can resume lending. Now that seems to me just about insane. And my advice to Mr. Obama has been, please get a second opinion. Talk to people who are more illustrious and better credentialed than I am. Talk to Joe Stiglitz. Talk to Paul Krugman. Talk to Nouriel Roubini. Talk to Paul Volcker. It's quite a statement when the most radical person affiliated with the administration is Paul Volcker. But that's the times in which we live, because he's got 2 or 3 months to get this to work, or he's going to lose the political capital that he has assembled, and he also runs the risk of getting on the wrong side of a populist backlash. If you happen to see the hearing before the Joint Economic Committee the other day, the Republicans were sounding more populist than the Democrats. And a fellow from the American Enterprise Institute was reminding the senators and congressmen of the virtues of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. So if the Democrats are seen as paladins of Wall Street, as improbable as it is, then the Republicans get to be the populists, but you get the wrong kind of populism. You don't get Gail Sincata populism, you get Lou Dobbs populism, where he doesn't like Wall Street much, but he doesn't like foreigners, and he doesn't like government. And that's what happens when progressives fail to solve problems. It opens up the political space for all kinds of creepy crawlies who are much worse. So the stakes for getting this right are enormous. Now, there's a quote by John Maynard Keynes that I have used before, other people have used before, but it particularly fits these circumstances. And Keynes wrote in 1936, speculators may do no harm as bubbles on a steady stream of commerce, but the situation is serious when enterprise becomes the bubble on a whirlpool of speculation. And that's the kind of economy we've had for the past 2 decades because of deregulation. And so going forward, we need to make sure that this never happens again. We need to follow the advice of Henry David Thoreau, simplify, simplify. We need a plain vanilla kind of banking system that is transparent and that's a lot less complicated. Before securitization was invented in the 1970s, banks took in deposits and they made loans. And there was a lot of entrepreneurship. Investment banks floated issues of securities. They connected entrepreneurs with investors. Banks did not go bust, and the situation, the system rather, worked like a watch. I think with very careful restrictions, there can be room for some kinds of securitization if there's transparency and a good deal of requirements for capital reserves, so that you don't get the kind of crazy leveraging that we had in this last crisis. But you know, Fannie Mae was originally the Federal National Mortgage Association. It was a government monopoly. It replenished the money that banks used to make loans so that banks could make other loans. And until they privatized the thing in 1969, mainly to get it off the federal budget, there were no problems. And now it's been taken back into receivership. It would seem to me not a bad thing if we went back to the original model of Fannie Mae and made securitization of mortgage lending a government monopoly. Now, That sounds radical, but there are times when, in order to be an effective liberal, you have to be a little bit radical. And the Community Reinvestment Act was bitterly attacked as radical legislation. To this day, you hear the right wing say that the subprime crisis was the result of CRA, one of the most outrageous slanders one could imagine, because if CRA had been enforced, and of course CRA requires lending to all segments of the community consistent with safety and soundness, and it was the consistent with safety and soundness part that was waived with these insane strategies, business strategies undertaken by subprime. You know, I was at a Fed conference a few weeks ago on community reinvestment, and one of the researchers very proudly stood up and said that all of the big banks had outstanding CRA ratings, and this was in the context of defending CRA against the charge that it had caused subprime. And my response was, well, yeah, but the affiliates of their holding companies that underwrote the predatory lenders, they were the ones who caused the problem. So how can you give an outstanding score to Citibank when an affiliate of Citibank is the prime enabler of subprime? And that's part of CRA modernization. So we need to modernize CRA. We need to make sure that, as President Obama said in a remarkable speech at Cooper Union last March when he was candidate Obama, that there should be no part of the financial system that is shadow banking, that is outside the schema of prudential regulation. Otherwise, you get what they call regulatory arbitrage, where the money goes to the parts of the system that are non-transparent and non-regulated. We need tough regulation against predatory lending of all kinds, and we need affirmative efforts to restore normal credit services to all of our communities. And of course, this is where all of you come in. When I was writing my latest book, Obama's Challenge, I went back and looked at presidents who I considered to be transformative. Presidents who came into office at a time of great crisis and used the crisis to move public opinion to embrace reforms that were seen as inconceivably radical at the time. So when Lincoln took office, his hope was to save the Union. But within 2 years, he had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves in the Confederate States, and by 1865, he'd freed the slaves everywhere. When Roosevelt took office, he campaigned against Herbert Hoover, alleging that Hoover was a big spender. In fact, Mariner Eccles, who was the only radical ever to be chair of the Federal Reserve, wrote in his own memoirs that if you look at the debates from the 1932 campaign, it looked like a gigantic typographical error where each candidate spoke the other's lines. But Roosevelt became a believer in the use of deficit spending, in the use of public works. Roosevelt had started out as a skeptic of deposit insurance. He quickly embraced deposit insurance and got the banks up and running again. And of course, Lyndon Johnson took office at a time when racist committee chairmen had bottled up President Kennedy's civil rights bill, but by July of 1964, President Johnson, working with the civil rights movement on the ground, persuaded the same reactionary 88th Congress to pass the great Civil Rights Act. Now, what all three of these great transformative presidents had in common was social movements, pushing them to do more. Lincoln would not have been Lincoln without the abolitionist movement. Lyndon Johnson would not have been Lyndon Johnson, and I'm referring to the good Lyndon Johnson of the Civil Rights era, without the heroism of Dr. King. And Roosevelt would not have been Roosevelt without the industrial labor movement. And these presidents did a dance with these social movements, sometimes working with them, sometimes being pressured by them, sometimes urging them to pressure the president to make me do what I need to do. And that's where you come in. That's where you come in. So it's a real pleasure to be with you, an honor to be with you, and you are that movement. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to have this podium move. Don't leave. So this morning you heard a robust discussion. I thought a very full discussion about the situation in housing with mortgages and REOs, and we had a second plenary which talked about other types of lending and the situation we're in relative to accessing other forms of credit and the challenges that are before us. So what we did is we invited a panel of experts, and I'm going to introduce them by name and organization, but in your CD as well as in the book, there's plenty of information about them, so I'm not going to spend valuable time doing that. But what we hope to do here is have, almost like you've dropped into the living room and we invited some friends around to sit around and talk about these issues, and that's really, I hope they're going to make my job easier, that I don't have to ask a question, get one answer, and then ask another question, get another, but rather that this be a conversation and a debate. We obviously didn't invite people who all think the same, because we really don't need to be up here talking about what is the same message with the same perspective and with the same focus. We really wanted to see whether we could challenge ourselves and you to think about going forward into this brave new economic world that's going to be created, and there will be a new one. There'll be a new role and new definitions and new parameters relative to our financial institutions. There's going to be a tremendous amount of money that's going to be spent on policies, programs, rescues, and the question is, where does that leave communities of color? Where does it leave traditionally underserved communities? Where does it leave blue-collar, working class, and working poor people? Are they part of this brave new economic world? And what is it that we need to be doing relative to that challenge going forward? And so I invited Bob, something different this year on the interactive session, to sort of get us kicked off on this session by talking about his perspective, and especially from a guy who helped us invent CRA. And it was great to listen to some of his remarks, because, Bob, this year we in fact have a bill where we're going to address a number of the weaknesses in CRA, so we hope to share that with you later. But let me sit down and begin by welcoming, well, you've met Bob. To Bob's right is Gail Burks, who's with the Nevada Fair Housing Center, is also a member of the Board of Directors of NCRC. Bert Ely is is an independent consultant, is also from the Cato Institute, and he's a principal at Eli and Company. He's an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Avis Jones DeWeaver, and if I call her Avis, it's because we have had a staff person who's named Avis for the last 12 years, but hopefully I'll get it right. It's Avis. She is the Director of Research and Public Policy Information Center at the National Council of Negro Women. So we welcome her, and an old friend, Lisa Mensa, who is now the Executive Director of the Initiative on Financial Security at the Aspen Institute. It's great to see her. Phil Bracken, a long-time engaged and one of the, I would say, one of the more courageous bankers, who's always willing to, stand up when the time comes to give the bank's perspective. He's an Executive Vice President of Wells Fargo, and I think someone who really adds to the conversation. Mark Zandi is probably, I guess today, probably the most well-known economist in America, since nobody gets mentioned more than Mark Zandi. And I have to say, he's been, when I first started to see his name in the paper, I was wondering, who is this guy? Because you heard earlier when CRL had said we're going to have 2.2 million foreclosures, Jim mentioned this earlier, we believed it, even though some of us thought, wow, that's a lot. Mark Zandi was saying, oh no, it's going to be a lot worse than that. And he started using numbers like 3, 4, 5 million, and now I don't know what he's up to now, 10 million, Mark. But the point is, here was a guy who was not a community activist, not from some progressive institute or anything like that, but rather just an economist saying, no, it's a lot worse. And I think he really helped people understand earlier that this problem was bigger than it was. And finally, Ed Mrzinski, a longtime ally of NCRC and is Director of Policy at Consumer Policy at U.S. PIRG, Public Interest Research Group, one of the most well-known and outspoken consumer advocates in the country. So please join me in welcoming all of them. So, okay, so let's kind of get started. I mean, we heard all day long, some of you weren't here, but most of these folks were, just that things are really bad and they're getting worse. And we have some solutions that have been offered by the administration. We do have to give the administration some credit that they're putting forth a little meat on the bones here. It's still a voluntary system, but they're priming the pump by putting financial incentives out for services to be able to modify loans. But there's a whole new set of wave of loans coming. There's the consumer credit cards that are going to challenge people's financial situations. Are we continuing to exaggerate this problem, or are we looking at, is there an end at the light of this tunnel? Is there any hope here that we can sort of look towards the future and say if we can work towards that, and if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll really begin to turn the corner on this? Anybody?
Why we ask Mark, he's the economist.
The economists never give hope.
Is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. You want to know when?
Yeah, how long is that tunnel? You're going to say November 2000.
Well, it's my view that the policy response is key and to this question, and when will it end? And I think the policy response has been very good. I think Bob laid it out nicely. There's stimulus. The package it's a large package, and it's pretty well designed, and I think that'll start kicking in later this year and help stabilize the job market. There's financial stability, this financial stability plan to help shore up the banking system. I understand the criticisms, and it wouldn't be the way I would do it, but I actually think it's quite elegant, creative, and I think it has a good chance of working to stabilize the system, which is key to everything working reasonably well. And we'll get a better sense of that later this year. And then the foreclosure mitigation plan that you mentioned, I think, yeah, it is complicated, but again, and it's got a Chicago professor all over it, with incentives here and incentives there. But it's actually, I think it's going to work reasonably well because the incentives are pretty significant. On the average loan, it's a lot of bucks to the mortgage servicers and to the homeowner. So I'm a little nervous that mortgage investors may not take the government up on the offer, but that's where bankruptcy reform comes in, and that will be a nice, a pretty significant stick to get modifications.
Do you think the plan's still as effective without bankruptcy reform, or there's safe harbor for services?
No.
You don't? You think that's critical to it being successful?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to finish my thought, that, and then I'll pass the baton and I'll be quiet. But
no.
I think the policy response is very good. I don't think it's big enough. I would have made it bigger. I think the problem is bigger, but I think it has a good shot at it, and I think by this time year the economy will stabilize.
Okay. Gail?
I think there's two pieces to sort of deciding if it's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of a new day or just another train coming. One is how we implement the policies that have been adopted, some which are very good, in terms of on the ground and the practical side of getting them out. I still think that until we have mandatory modification or judicial modification, those of us that have to deal with these cases every day will still see servicers and investors that are not modifying loans, even though there are some incentives. So what would make practitioners feel as though we don't have to get out of the way of the train is mandatory modification. I think there's some hope. There's more than there was before, but we have to get to the point of cleaning up the foreclosure mess.
Mandatory modification by means of judicial?
Requiring all lenders to modify loans in addition to providing the judicial modification option. Lots of people are filing bankruptcy. In Nevada, 51% of the people who file bankruptcy are doing it just to stop a foreclosure.
Is the president's plan, Mark says he doesn't think it's going to work without the judicial modification, without the safe harbor for services. Do you think it's going to work without those?
No, I do not.
Interesting. Bert?
John, I just wanted to add on in terms of what comes at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully it's daylight, not the next train. But I think we also need to be realistic that it may not be a very powerful recovery. It may take time. And the reason why is because of the huge debt overhang that we have in the economy. When you look back over the data over really the last 2 decades, we see a steady buildup in debt, public sector, household, businesses, but particularly in the household sector. And a lot of that has kind of come a cropper, particularly with the decline in stock portfolios, 401ks, and home prices. And my concern is it's going to take a long time to work that off. Now, some of that debt overhang may be eliminated through bankruptcy and mortgage modifications, but there's still a lot of debt out in the economy, and I think this is a major long-run challenge that this country has to address, and that is how do we move back towards a society that we had 20 years ago where there was a relatively high savings rate and less debt in the economy relative to GDP. That is it's taken us years to get where we are today, at least 2 decades by my account. It's going to take a long time to get out of it, and therefore we have to realize that this recovery is going to be a slow recovery as people start working off these huge debt burdens that have developed.
Right. Phil, you're trying to get in.
Thank you, John. I think, it's we're in this crisis that seems to have no end, but there will be an end to it. There will be a recovery. There will be. America is incredibly resilient, and the epicenter of this mess started with housing, and I believe that the cure it'll be necessary for housing to be at the epicenter of the cure, and part of that is really it's simple. It's 2 pieces. We've got to stem the tide of foreclosures. We have to do that. And then we have to find a way to stimulate the absorption of the existing inventory across America, because if we don't do that, housing prices will continue to decline. And the decline in house prices has a ripple effect, an aftershock effect in every segment of our economy, whether it's auto loans or buying furniture or whatever it may be. So. And I think I would say that the administration's plan takes some bold steps to help fix those problems. The 3-part housing plan, the modification plan is good, maybe not great, but it's good. The hidden value of the modification plan is not necessarily the incentives for servicers to do more modifications. I think they're doing. I don't think that's the value. The real value in the modification plan is if it constructs a format that becomes the pattern of practice for the industry. It may very well lead to the pooling and servicing contracts of private investors to have to view that as the new pattern of practice. And I don't know that it needs a judicial fix as long as that pattern of practice fix could be implemented. And there are many other things that I think we still need to do to prevent more foreclosures. Some of those are just practical steps that we could have the GSEs and HUD implement rather easily, although to this point they have not done so. The second part of that plan about the refinance incentives, I think, are good, not great, and the implementation of that is certainly going to help stem the tide of foreclosures. And certainly the third part of the plan, the government's investment in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and capital investment, and as importantly, the Treasury's announcement to continue to buy mortgage product from Fannie and Freddie is a critical part to absorbing the inventory across America, because if we don't have that secondary market capability, there wouldn't be mortgage rates at the same level that they're at, and certainly wouldn't be the availability of credit. And you'll note that in that plan, there's no sunset provision in the plan. It says, and probably by design, although I would assume it's by design, that it doesn't say that that plan would end. It simply says the Treasury will buy mortgage product from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac sort of in perpetuity, and it does not have a strike price on it either. So it sort of says the volume is unlimited and the time frame is in perpetuity. I think that's a solid signal that it's important that the administration and the Treasury continue to provide that liquidity, although I would say that we do need a formal announcement from the administration about explicit guarantees.
Well, why don't we take that up later? What I don't want to leave, obviously we've heard from four successive speakers that it's foreclosures, foreclosures. And in fact, I remember in February, NCRC had a slogan, it's about foreclosures, stupid. Well, apparently people remain stupid for a very long time because there seemed to be nobody listening about really taking proactive steps to do anything about the foreclosures. In fact, in February when we proposed Help Now, it was called, it was about purchasing these loans, pulling them down from Wall Street, and really having them modified, refinanced, then to try to get ahead of this foreclosure crisis. And I look now and I think, and I hear from a lot of lenders that the foreclosures more have to do with job loss today than with bad loans, that the biggest segment of them now are the job loss, and that's continuing to pile on. So I guess I want to be as optimistic as you are, Mark. You don't think you actually gave us a date of where that light is at the end of the tunnel, but I actually think I read something where you actually gave a specific month and year that you expect everything to be over. And I don't know whether it was tongue-in-cheek and you got printed out of context, but maybe you'll mention that date. But what about the worst?
You have to buy my book to find out.
Buy the book to find out. There you go. Self-promotion 101.
Than his book, I assure you.
Okay, we should all get that out of anybody with books, mention them and get it out of your system. But seriously, what about that? I mean, have we passed that point where if you really dealt with those foreclosures? Now, obviously, you still need to deal with them because they're continuing to be a drag on the economy and promoting this recession. But have we reached that point where, had we dealt with the foreclosures, it really could have stopped things? I mean, I'm curious about that from anybody.
Well, I don't. I mean, my back-of-the-envelope estimate is that the Treasury plan or the Treasury HUD plan will deal with maybe a third of the at-risk mortgages. I mean, I think there are people whose mortgages are underwater to a much greater extent than 105%, and although those loans can be modified, the further underwater they are, the more money it takes, and the harder a bargain you have to strike with the investor who owns the bond. It would be much better to use the governance power of eminent domain, take back the bonds, pay them off at so many cents on the dollar, and turn them back into mortgages. And as you like to say, if we can use eminent domain to take away people's houses, we can use eminent domain to help people keep their houses. But
you took my best line, Bob.
I know, but I credited you.
Stepped on it.
But see, this is the larger context that really troubles me, that all of the debate is within fairly narrow parameters, ideologically and institutionally, where there would not be much difference between Tim Geithner and Hank Paulson, where it's all done through this incredibly convoluted system and aimed at pumping it back up rather than replacing it with a simpler system. If you just went back to Fannie and Freddie as true public institutions, you wouldn't need Treasury to buy their stuff because they would have the capacity to keep the securities, they aren't even securities, they're just mortgages, in their own portfolios and use the direct borrowing authority that they have to underwrite the activities. It's just gotten so ramified and so convoluted, and the purpose of this, despite all that we heard for the past 30 years about it provides liquidity and innovation is a good thing, that what you have to remember is the whole purpose of this system was to enrich middlemen. And I mean, I once did some calculations going back to the mid-70s when mortgage-backed securities were invented. And contrary to the propaganda, the spread between 30-year treasuries and 30-year mortgages didn't narrow, because of the invention of mortgage-backed securities. The only thing that changed was a lot of middlemen made a lot of money.
I want to.
And then you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, Bob. That's a great point. And what I want to say is, first of all, that I'm political. I'm a community organizer who wears a tie because I have to walk around on Capitol Hill all the time for my job. But this issue of the 6,600 foreclosures per day, or even more, depending on whose numbers you look at, is shameful that the banks that failed are still driving the political train on Capitol Hill and slowing down the mortgage foreclosure loan modification bill. And we need to change that system as well as the financial system. We need to get people up there on Capitol Hill lobbying their senators and representatives, and somebody's got to tell this story before it's too late, because this bill has been delayed for over a year now, and it might pass the Senate today in some weakened form to give judges some loan modification authority. But I want to say that in terms of the long run, in terms of solving some of these problems, in addition to the housing crisis, I think at the core of this, many of us will agree, was a lack of marketplace protections, consumer protections, marketplace protections. Banks were making unfair loans, unfair home loans, unfair credit card loans, unfair auto loans, unfair student loans. We didn't have any regulators protecting us. One of the most important parts of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act was a very small provision that established something called the Congressional Oversight Panel. And then Speaker Pelosi and Leader Reid appointed Harvard professor Elizabeth Warren, one of the nation's leading protectors of families, to chair that commission. And in addition to overseeing the TARP and asking for more transparency, where's the money going, which is most of what they've been doing, they've published a report that a growing number of consumer, community, civil rights, labor, and other civic organizations believe forms the solution to our problems. And it is basically to return marketplace protections, to restore regulation across the entire financial system, no more shadow financial system, and to move forward. So NCRC is part of the movement that is moving toward this, and we really need to establish laws that protect the public interest first, and that's something that hasn't changed in Washington yet, and we need to get up there on the Hill and tell them to change it.
Sorry. Go ahead. Bert, you were trying to get in.
Well, no, Mark, and then I'll follow.
No, but Lisa.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You haven't even spoken. Go ahead.
It's okay. I'm on a different point, so.
Different point.
Okay. I do think the economy will stabilize by this time next year. I think 2009 will be a very tough year. The next 6 months, obviously very difficult, but by this time next year, the economy will stabilize, and by 2011, we'll grow, and we'll feel more comfortable, and we'll exhale. So I think that's going to happen, and I think that will happen given the policy response that we've gotten with a little bit more. We'll get a little bit more. I want to focus on foreclosure mitigation for just a second, just give you some numbers. In my view, roughly 2 million loans will be modified in the president's plan. In the president's plan.
Over what period of time are you?
Over the next 2 years. Over the next 2 years. Now he's saying
But you've predicted 10 million foreclosures over the next 4.
Yeah. So let me give you the numbers.
Yeah, okay.
I know you want the numbers. I'm going to give you all the numbers.
Yeah.
In my view, 2 million modifications. I think we'll probably get in the next 2 years. We'll probably get 1 million in bankruptcy filings, in addition to what we would have gotten otherwise, because people will go into Chapter 13 to get the cram down. I'm assuming that legislation gets passed. Okay. That's 3 million. We will have another 5 to 5.5 million mortgage loan defaults outside of that. So 3 million of defaults are forestalled either by modification or by bankruptcy, and we're going to get another 5 to 5 million over the next 2 years that go to default. And of that, probably 3 million actually go through the entire foreclosure process. So 3 million.
Which is higher than the amount of foreclosures it's at a higher pace than the foreclosures we've already experienced.
Right. And in fact, in 2009, this will be the peak year in terms of defaults and in terms of foreclosure sales. That will happen this year. Now let me just go on one more second. So the modification plan is very helpful. It will work to a significant degree, but I do agree that if I were designing the plan, it would include principal write-down, because For two reasons. One, because I think well, the key reason is we're going to have redefaults. I mean, even if you have these modifications and get the debt-to-income ratios down, because these folks are so far underwater that if any other event happens in their life, or they spring a leak in the roof and they have to put another $10K into the home, it just doesn't make sense, and they're going to default. It won't be in the next 2 years, but it will be somewhere down the road. So you're not solving the problem per se. We're kind of kicking the can down the road, hoping that the economy stabilizes, house prices start to rise, and those things help mitigate those foreclosures. But principal write-down, I would do it very different than what you're suggesting. I would, because most of the foreclosures are going to occur among mortgage loans that are in mortgage pools. And here, the way to solve this problem, and the people who own those securities are major institutions. There's the Federal Home Loan Bank system. It's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's Wells Fargo. It's pension funds and insurance companies. It's us. It's us as investors. And if we make them suffer losses, significant losses, we're going to suffer more as a result as taxpayers. So what I would do is I'd have principal write-down, but I'd pay off the investor. Because why give, we're paying them off anyway through TARP and other forms of financial stability. Why not take the money and buy out the investors at a, pick a price that helps them and helps the homeowners stay in their homes and solve this problem once and for all.
So you don't see any moral hazard in that?
At this point, there is absolutely no moral hazard. Everyone is...
There's no morality.
Well, no. Everyone's getting crushed. We are all getting crushed. No one's going to come away from this. Not a single soul on this planet is going to come away from this period and think, I got away with one. There's not a chance of that. There is no moral hazard anymore. Not in this context.
I'm trying to get you in, but you've just got to jump in.
Well, I was going to ask, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in.
Okay, great.
Stabilize for whom? What I'm most concerned about is that we've already seen over 3 million families losing their homes. We've already seen that it's disproportionately impacting communities of color. We see that overall we have an unemployment rate of, 8%. In the black community, it's 10 to 13%, depending upon if you're looking at black women versus black men. And I am concerned about what will happen to those families who have already lost billions of dollars of wealth that they cannot use to send their children to college, billions of dollars of wealth that they can't pass down from one generation to another. I would love to be patient and wait for this overarching goal to happen at some point in the future that will help a portion of those that need assistance. But I wish we could be a little bit more proactive. I would love to see a way in which we can make sure that individuals who are hurting today can get help faster, and that we can think creatively and boldly about what other sorts of directions we need to go in to help those individuals who have already lost so much.
John, I pick up there too, because I like the theme you're on. It's bigger on the recovery. And I think you've mentioned this is an audience that wants to talk foreclosures, but there's another wave that will follow this crisis. It's another wave that will follow around where is our true recovery. And this is where I would like to think bolder. There are people who've been harmed, yes, but it is also a question of where their wealth will be in the future. Where is the nest egg to buy the next home, or for the children to buy the next home? Where is the nest egg to save for a safe retirement, to go to college yourself, or to help finance? All of those things have been put at risk. And my hope is that we use this crisis not only to solve the immediate bloodshed that's happened in our most critical asset, our homes, but also that we would think bigger, and we would help this administration think bigger about a moment for true reinvestment in the wealth of our low and moderate income families. This is an agenda we should not forget at this moment. This is a moment to ask for more matching dollars, so that when people are trying to save for a home, they could get to that home faster. They could come with more down payment. This is the moment to ask for that. Ask for more matches as we save for our retirement, as we save for college. We need to build these nest eggs faster. That's how I would deal with this debt overhang. This is a moment to get serious about household savings, but to do it in a way that's simple, that's fairer, and that's more robust, to stop accepting a very low, modest rate for most of our households, and to ask for more. So that's what I would say.
Well said. Well said. Now, I guess one of the challenges I see as we think about these things, and Ed has raised the issue of needing more consumer protections. I want to talk about that more. But you have a public out there that's being bombarded on the radio and through press that somehow poor people caused this crisis. I was in London sitting beside the head of the British Bankers Association. I was going to give a talk just before he got up before me and he said, the reason for the American and now worldwide financial crisis is because there was too much yen in search of a home and because of poor people in America. Now, this is in Britain. So, you know, between the Rush Limbaughs and the Hannitys and the other people of the world who keep hammering away as if poor people, the ones who mismanaged our financial system, and yeah, we all know, anybody who's really engaged in this work knows how absurd that is, but the problem is there is an American public opinion that has been shaped in a way that really makes it difficult for us to bring forward some of these things. And I think President Obama, to his credit, he almost always does some educating to people as he begins to unroll things and talks about things. He talks about, you know, what the real problem is and why we got into situations that we're in. And if we're going to have the kind of policies and regulations that move us forward in a way as if regular people mattered, do we not need to really focus on making sure that the American public understands how we really got into this crisis and what the real solutions to long-term, stable, democratic economic success really looks like and how to get there? So I didn't mean to get off in a speech there, but I think that's just an important part of this conversation because it's going to be the hurdle for us. If right now in Congress they're arguing, I mean they're up there arguing about whether congressmen, supposedly educated, smart people, are up there arguing about whether poor people caused this crisis. So, you know, now whether that's a ruse and they really know better, it doesn't matter. A number of us have been in this town long enough to know how the game works. If you blame somebody else, well then you don't have to really focus on the problem. And I personally would like to get beyond the blame because blame's not going to get us anywhere. It's all about let's come up with solutions that get us someplace that's going to have the kind of vision that a great America could really be, where all people have the opportunity to be part of it, and hard work and savings and commitment, you can be successful. People, I am on a speech. Okay, so I'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up by saying this, and hopefully I'm stimulating some thought here, and you're going to jump in. But you know, we did some. We worked with some pollsters, and we went around the country, and I sat behind one of those glass windows, and we asked a bunch of Republican voters and a bunch of Democratic voters. And we worked with Frank Luntz, who some of you may know is a very famous Republican pollster, and we worked with Jennifer Laszlo, who's the Democratic pollster. And we asked all these groups of voters the same questions. How do they feel about should we have a Community Reinvestment Act, a law that creates an obligation for banks to loan safely and soundly to all people who are able to pay them back? Should we have fair lending laws that prohibit discrimination? What would happen if a black woman and a white man went into a bank for a small business loan? Who's more likely to get it? And what shocked me was, no matter whether we were in Iowa or New Hampshire, New York or Texas, those Republican voters and those Democratic voters didn't vary in what they thought ought to happen. So there's a fundamental fairness in the American public. Where we begin to diverge is what they think is going on, which gets me to the point of the Rush Limbaughs and the others of the world who are distorting the reality of what's going on. And it seems to me if we don't deal with that as part of the solution, we're going to be less effective. Please, Bob.
John, I wanted to push Mark a little bit.
You're changing the subject?
No, because I certainly hope you're right. In other words, politically, if the economy has not bottomed out and is seen as on the mend by middle of 2008, then you get Obama losing seats in Congress. That may be cheerful to some on this panel, not cheerful to me. And then you get real gridlock, and the president can't lead. But given the fact that, and you probably know the numbers on this better than I do, but if you take the recession of 2001, where you didn't have the housing wipeout, and you had a partial wipeout on Wall Street, but not the kind of crash that you've had in the past 6 months. I think it took about 4 or 5 years for the unemployment numbers to come back, maybe even 6, to what they were before the recession started. So given the wipeout in people's net worth and the fact that the biggest banks are in a state of ill-concealed insolvency, that they're only able to present themselves as solvent because the Treasury and the Fed are pouring in $9 trillion if you count the indirect. I think it's your figure. If you count the indirect as well as the direct, how can we possibly have a recovery within 16 months?
Well, it's easy to be dark in this environment, and we're losing 700,000 jobs a month, and you tend to start forecasting with a ruler in that kind of environment. Just like in the boom times, you say it never ends. In the dark times, there's never any light. But let me make a case. To me, the difference between a typical recession and a bad one and a depression is a loss of faith, a loss of confidence. And that's what we have here, a complete lack of confidence. Everyone's running for the bunker at the same time. And that's investors in the equity market, that's businesses and the layoffs, that's consumers who aren't buying and pulling back aggressively. So let me construct a scenario for you where how that might turn around. Suppose we get into July, August, September of this year, and we're losing 250,000 jobs a month, not 700,000 jobs. And any other time, that's Armageddon. But in this environment, that's real progress. And then you got two data points. We're losing 650,000 in February. We're losing 250,000 in August. You draw the line, and it says, oh, it's zero. Job losses come early 2010. And then people think, oh, GE is selling for $8 a share. Oh, a Miami condo is selling for $200,000. You know, right on Brickell Avenue. When you walk out, there's a lot of nice things out on, Miami on Brickell Avenue. And people say there's value there. And then immediately people come in. It's not like there isn't money there. I mean, I can feel it. I work on Wall Street, and out of the ashes of Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Merrill Lynch, you've got hedge funds everywhere accumulating cash and waiting. And they're going to come in, and stock prices start to rise. And the whole world changes very quickly. The whole kind of sentiment changes very quickly. And then all of a sudden, you realize, oh, we're selling 9 million cars a year, but underlying demand for cars is 15 million units a year. Oh, and we're producing 400,000 housing starts. 400,000. Give you context that we were producing 2 million housing starts back 2 years ago, and underlying demand is 1.5 million. So immediately you go from 450,000 to 1 million. You go from 9 million to 1.2 million. That's a lot of income, a lot of jobs. Things can turn very quickly. And if the policy works and we've cleaned out the banking system and recapitalized, then credit starts to flow. So, it's important not to get caught up in the darkness. I mean, it is dark, and it's easy to be dark and to be pessimistic. And, I'm pretty pessimistic. I mean, I think it's going to be pretty bad. But, I think things can turn. And the policy response is, obviously is key to that.
If we can go one more round, I'd like to put in a kind word for the dark side. You had a total of about 8,000 bank failures in the period from 1929 to 1933, 4,000 plus in the winter of 32-33 alone. It only took a couple of months after that to get the banking system completely cleaned up. You had the bank holiday, then you had deposit insurance. You didn't have securitization. You didn't have this convoluted mess operating as a kind of a dead weight. You didn't have these, what did Gene use? A wonderful term, legacy assets. Yeah. Legacy assets.
Right.
And yet, in the 30s, despite all of the New Deal, unemployment never got below 14% until the war came, and we had deficits of 29% of GDP per year. So I'm with you if the administration is capable of really upping the dosage of stronger medicine. Bigger stimulus package, more effective program on the banks, more effective program on mortgage relief. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then I think it's a kind of an Irving Fisher scenario where it's a debt deflation, where the toxic assets just continue to drag the whole thing down, and the unemployment and the depressed housing values and the depressed asset values all feed on themselves, and it's not enough that there are bargains out there. So I hope you're right. I think in order for you to be right, the medicine's going to have to be stronger. Maybe we can agree on that.
But if I could...
I do agree with that. Yeah, I do. I think, I'm sorry, I just, in agreement, if I were king for the day, I'm right there with you. I'd make it bigger. But I think even with what we got, and what we will get if this doesn't actually pan out as anticipated, I think it'll be enough. I think it'll be enough.
But the thing we have to realize, and why I think we'll get the turnaround or the bottoming out within a year, but a relatively slow recovery, is because we had an unsustainable wealth bubble developed in the country, in the stock market and in house prices. And what we're going through right now, picking up a little bit on what Bob is saying, is a price adjustment with regard to assets. And coupled with that is a need, coming back to Lisa's point, of a need for more savings. The savings rate in this country went into a serious decline over the last 2 decades. We have to start bringing that back. But as people save more, even if they're working more, that is still going to mean a sluggish growth in consumption. So we're in a bad crack, but we have to work through it. There are no easy ways around it. I'd like to touch on the foreclosure issue, if I can, in a minute. First of all, with regard to mortgage modifications, Mark, I think you're optimistic. I don't think it's going to be anywhere near 2 million, and let me tell you why. It's going to be a very bureaucratic, complicated process, and a lot of people are going to be frustrated, turned off by the process. And not only that, we're going to have a lot of redefaults. Some would suggest over 50%. Why? When a mortgage modification only looks at the mortgage and doesn't look at the total financial position of a person, including changes in income as well as their other debt obligations, whether it's credit cards, car loans, student loans, what have you, you're setting yourself up for default. This is one of my major criticisms of the mortgage modification process. It isn't looking at the person or the family in a totality. But I want to say something else that I think is probably going to be very radical, may not even go down well with some of the folks in this room, and that is, I don't think that everyone is it's necessarily in every homeowner's interest to necessarily stay in that home. There are some folks who frankly would be better off financially getting out from the mortgage, becoming a renter again, and in some cases actually relocating to another community. And I think this becomes particularly important in some of those areas of the country, like in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, which has had population decline for 35 years, doesn't seem to be reversing. Many folks would be better off leaving their home there and moving to an area of the country where there are better job opportunities. One of the problems with home ownership is it does impede labor mobility, and this is one of those times when we need
So is everybody going to be moving to, what is it, South Dakota or North Dakota, which is the only state that... Where are those jobs that they should...
It's not just a matter of where the jobs are going to be, where they are today, but where they're going to be in the future.
Yeah.
This is we have that history in this country of labor mobility, of jobs moving around areas, having periods of growth and then decline, and we have to recognize that that's an important part of the adjustment process. So it is not always bad when someone gives up the ownership of their home. In some cases, they're actually going to be better off and less burdened by moving to another area, becoming a renter again for a while.
Well, you've got the audience talking, but I think Phil is...
That's why I'm here.
That's right. Phil.
Thank you, John. I'd like to try to take a bit of a brighter context. This is my 35th year in the mortgage banking business, and I tell you, I believed it when I started in this business. I believe it today. I believe it will be true 35 years from now. Home ownership is the key to generational wealth for America. And if we don't find the right solutions for that, we will not build generational wealth and we won't build equality. What does it require? It doesn't require the word home ownership. It requires 2 words, sustainable home ownership. Because it doesn't do any good to put somebody in a home where that they can't afford. And there's a simple solution to that, and I know John has heard me say this many times. In fact, beginning in 2003, I helped craft the fair and responsible lending practices. They're on our website. You can go look at them. And they're simple things, like first, nobody should get a loan unless they determine that you can determine that they have the ability to repay it. You know, I know that may be radical, but that's, you know, that the consumer should have some net benefit to the transaction. You know, that you shouldn't do negative amortization mortgage loans. That, you know, it doesn't make sense. Those are the things that, you know, just if you had a clean slate and you said what makes sense, well, you know, everybody in this room could probably write that script. And I want to just say that, you know, I think the purpose, and I do think that we do need, that one of the problems of getting into this mess, and I think it's, the learning has to be, is got to shape the policy of the future. We had a awful regulatory system. There were literally thousands of, I guess you would call themselves, the people that held themselves out as mortgage providers, that were not licensed, regulated, examined, supervised, and none of it. 18 states that did not license, regulate, or examine mortgage brokers. And so, you know, and plenty of other Wall Street and other firms that, you know, flew under the radar screen because the OCC and OTS didn't regulate them, and Federal Reserve, and it was a regulatory mess. But that's got to get fixed.
Well, I think that's, I just want to say, to the C-SPAN world who are watching this on C-SPAN, this is a major financial institution talking about the lack of regulation, which got us into this. This is not a radical, liberal, partisan, well, and you know, and frankly, we couldn't agree more.
And let me finish the point about that. There's no question that we need a fair, equitable landscape for regulation. It's just been unfair when consumers were able to go to institutions that were not licensed, regulated, or supervised to get mortgage loans. It didn't make sense in America. So I'm going to move on to two other quick points. I think Mark's point about the investor buyout is an important point. When people say there are these pooling and servicing contracts and they are impositions to doing modifications, etc., who do you think these investors are? It's the Teachers Pension Fund of California. It's the Sheet Metal Workers Pension Fund. It's, you know, it's the City of Cleveland. It's the, you know, that's who the investors are. So when you ask them to say, well, just let them take write-downs, well, what happens then? You know, somebody's got to, you know, figure out a way to change the mark-to-market rules for sure. That just it's got to get fixed either on a temporary basis or long-term. And certainly there's got to be some way to make these investors whole, to provide that backdrop. If made whole, I do believe that there would be, they would have more interest in doing more modifications, and I think that would be a faster way to get at it. The last thing I want to make a point about, and I just wanted to say I disagree with Bob's point about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and I only want to say that, you know, I think we've seen that movie. That movie, the private entities that were undercapitalized and highly leveraged, and we saw that the balance sheets resulted in what we have right now. So we already have a government agency that's you know, very good at providing securitization to the marketplace, called Ginnie Mae, and I don't know that we need 7 or 8 others. There are models that could work, and none of us wanted to see Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac get in a bad situation, and it was we all wish that had not happened, but it did, and I think there are plenty of solutions that we could profit.
But didn't we see, and that's Fannie Mae the movie 3, but wasn't Fannie Mae movie 1, wasn't it one of the best corporations to work for in the United States, and really expanded the housing market, and when they didn't get into subprime, when they really stayed with prime mortgages, didn't they really make a great contribution to expanding home ownership?
Well capitalized, under you know, limited leverage, etc. Yes.
Right. I'm just saying there were sequels.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just have 3 quick points going to my colleague's problem. The first is regarding the modification issue he mentioned. If a modification is done properly, and those of us in the community that know how to do a modification, and if the services actually listen to what we suggest, looks across the board at your finances, what's coming in, what's going out, your credit, to make sure that we come up with something that works. So a real modification, if done properly, is done correctly. Second point is in terms of the idea of moving. And this one sort of fundamentally makes me want to jump out of my skin for a couple of reasons. Because there are people certainly who participated in the mortgage problem and who were not responsible. But I think we have the numbers to show that statistically, the majority of the subprime loans went to people that were targeted. And to suggest that they should give up their home and move and start over is fundamentally unfair. We need to exercise some leadership here and say, there are times that there are things that are wrong and we need to do whatever we can to correct it, regardless of who loses a buck. Last thing, in terms of blaming the victim, there's an opportunity, I think, for the community and the industry to come together and show some leadership. You know, as community people, we're not real good at marketing or public relations. We kind of dig in, do our work, and we really don't care much about the cameras. But we can get out the story about community reinvestment. There's some great initiatives that have occurred throughout the country that are still occurring, lending that is still happening to first-time homebuyers. So we need to do a better job of dispelling the myth and blaming the victim.
Yeah, well said. And I just want to tie, before we go to Ed, just tie together, Phil's comments from an executive vice president of Wells Fargo who talked about an unregulated industry that really was allowed to do what it wanted to do for a period of time, probably between 2001 to 2008, with this notion of, people, disproportionately people of color and poor people getting products that were probably unsuitable, certainly more high cost, more predatory. And consider that in 1993 and 1994, when Fannie and Freddie were very healthy and when we did not have the subprime market we had, 93 and 94, for African American home buyers, a 50% jump in home ownership under the data that is available through the federal government. 50%, 2 years in a row, 50% increases, no subprime whatsoever. And my guess is those loans, assuming they didn't do refinance through the subprime and predatory loans, that those loans are fine and those people are still paying on them. And so there's, there is the system, the very system we have, can do and has done some very affordable, very reasonable price mortgages that are prime rates and can treat people fairly. But obviously, if you don't have a regulated system, you allow for for other institutions to come in and change that dynamic. I got Ed and I.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, John. That
Davis.
I totally agree that we need to restore confidence. We need to restore, of course, investor confidence to get the economy going. We also need to restore consumer confidence so the consumers save and help get the economy going again. And one of the things that we really need to do that is confidence in the financial system. I don't think they have that now. There are people who are afraid to put their money in banks, even with the $250,000 FDIC increased limits. People are scared that their banks are using gotcha practices, predatory loans on low income and people of color, credit card companies using a business model of tricks and traps. They're not making good money, they're making bad money on top of the good money, and that's unfair. The banks are even making payday loans through their unfair overdraft practices that result in $17 billion a year in bank income. And so consumers need confidence in a financial system that has marketplace protections. And just briefly, that public interest coalition that I talked about that's forming is supporting legislation that Senators Durbin, Schumer, and Ted Kennedy introduced this week based on an idea from Professor Warren that we already have a Consumer Product Safety Commission so that your $10 toaster doesn't catch fire and burn down your house. We need a Financial Product Safety Commission that establishes standards to make sure there are no predatory loans so that your mortgage doesn't kick you out of your house or your credit cards don't throw you out of your house. And that's one of the steps that we need to take rather than having the OCC and the Federal Reserve doing the regulation. And I'm very pleased to hear the comments from Wells Fargo that we had an uneven regulatory system. But I'd also point out that, as Bob Kuttner said, the banks that may have been getting good CRA ratings, also we're securitizing some of the real bad loans.
Right. And I want to get back to that, but I want to give Avis a chance to jump in here.
Sure, and I just want to echo a point that you made, John, and that you echoed as well, is that it's really important to drive this conversation and to not be stuck in the doldrums of responding to misinformation time and time again. Now, what you did at NCRC was wonderful in terms of kicking back, in terms of all of the misinformation that was plastered all over the place with regards to CRA. But we need to be more proactive in those areas. I love the idea of getting people out in the community to tell their stories and say, this is what's happened to me, and this is not right, and this is not fair. Most Americans understand fairness, as your research showed. But what they get on day in and day out is just one drop of misinformation after another. We have hysterical analysts on TV talking about a lot of things that are totally wrong. Thank God for Jon Stewart. Okay, so there is some rebuttal there, but isn't it a shame that it takes a comedian to pull out facts and not journalists that frankly are not doing their jobs on CNN and CNBC and all these other channels that most individuals see every day. So to the extent, so I want to echo your point, we need a movement. We need a movement to really uncover these things and go out into the streets if necessary, in the halls of Congress, to demand that we really address those real issues today.
Lisa.
John, I would say, and following Avis's point, though, I would push further than the consumer protection agenda. I think it's absolutely what we need to say as a first order of business. If we regulate toasters, you got to get a fair mortgage. But isn't the point also, how are we really going to get real wealth back into our communities? And it isn't just stopping at the level of what are the fair rules about a prepaid card, or I think we're going to agree to that pretty quickly, and particularly who's in charge now. And I think there's a bigger battle to fight here. And you asked me when we were talking about this, where are the pressure points? And I would just say, if we miss the progressive wing, if we stop at the level of the rules we write for how the industry works, and we don't push on to tax policy and ask people, how are we going to support more people getting into this critical asset? See, I think it comes back to things like refundable tax credits that should support the way we save and build wealth. And I think if we stop at the regulatory moment and don't ask for that next agenda, as we do a lot right now, as we say we're hurting, then we're missing a side of where real activism should push for the wealth of low and moderate income people. And I would just say, don't stop here. Let's push. You know, it is different than the 70s. We can push. We've had the first battle. We know where to go in those lines. Let's push for a battle we've never won it yet. You know, one of the hardest things, and I did a talk radio show in Mississippi last month, and it was to defend something that most of us think is pretty great, a refundable tax credit. Why shouldn't you, if you can save, why shouldn't you get a refundable tax credit? And there's a lot of pushback at even that level. And I think, and yet I think that's an agenda that has some sharing of left and right. That if we do something we all think is right to do, save for a house, save for college, save for our retirement, and we ask our tax code to equally make it fair, let those people who are earning below $30,000 also get some of the tax benefits for that. I think that's an agenda we can also win on. So I would just say that.
Yeah, I agree. I want to emphasize Avis's point as well, Avis's point, I did it. And that is, we have got to recognize that it isn't even just tax policy, it's education, it's health care. There's so many things in this country that if we can design the system so that people who are willing to work hard, pay their taxes, pursue their version of the American dream, whatever it is, which is, you know, as somebody who grew up in the projects, I never met anybody who didn't want that. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but there is this imagery out there that there's just this massive amount of people who are just looking to not do anything, not work, and have everybody else take care of them. How they got that image is probably obvious to most people, and this is why, as community leaders, as mayors, as religious leaders, we have to be out there really talking to the universe about making sure that the system is fair enough in all aspects so that children can get education, children can get health care, adults can get health care, people can get mortgages that are not abusive, access to credit and consumer products that are not abusive, but that to get most people to understand that if that occurs, America wins. We all win by cleaning up the system and making sure that everybody has the opportunity, because we have an incredible talent base here in this country that is yearning to be able to be successful in our system, but we've got to make sure the system is fair for that to happen. So, yeah. Bert.
I'm going to agree with Lisa with regard to the tax system. As I look at the numerous, and I've identified so far 11 different underlying public policy causes of this crisis, the tax system is number one because it puts a penalty on saving, it provides an incentive to spend, it puts a penalty on accumulating equity capital in businesses, and it puts a premium on over-leveraging. And what's gotten us into trouble? It's been under-saving and over-leveraging. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. The other thing I want to say with regard to regulation, and that is be wary what you wish for. The crisis that we have today is to a very great extent a product of government financial regulation. Bob talked about the growth of securitization. The growth of securitization is largely a product of government banking regulation and specifically capital regulation. It was a regulatory arbitrage facilitated by technology. And when we talk about having more regulation, just start thinking then about what the lawyers and the consultants and the financial engineers to do will figure out how to get around it. Regulation can never be proactive. It's always reactive. And what it puts in place is a roadmap for what I call the evaders, whether it's the lawyers, the financial engineers, whoever, to figure out a way around it. And so the question then comes, in terms of getting genuine, sustainable reform, do you focus on regulation, on prescriptive and proscriptive rules that people will then try to figure out how to get around, or do you deal more with incentives?
We are talking about the American securitization system. You're saying it's highly regulated. You're saying that.
No. Securitization is the regulatory arbitrage. Mm-hmm. And what we have to understand is what drove securitization. I'm going to agree with you about the cost. I have objected and raised concerns about securitization since the early 90s. I never saw it as being very efficient. But in effect, what we've done is we have expended lots of real resources so that the financial markets can evade and sidestep bank regulation. What I did not appreciate years ago that I now appreciate is the moral hazard that was built in it of passing the credit risk, the bump credit risk, the misrepresented credit risk on from A to B to C to D to E. And that's why I am more concerned than ever about regulation. But,
so let me be clear. One of the country's leading libertarians,
that's right,
is saying the problem is the securitization companies were able to avoid regulation.
That's right.
Okay, I just want to be sure I'm understanding.
No. I'll be the first to. I know that sounds very unlibertarian.
I think we're converting. We're converting Bert.
No, John. No, you're not converting me. It's what I'm trying to do is get at what are the underlying reasons. And let me give you, if I can, just a couple of specifics on that. One of the things that facilitated as much securitization as we did are the rating agencies. S&P and Moody's, pardon me, Mark, and Fitch. Now, why were the rating agencies able to do what they able to do? It's because of the First Amendment protection they have against negligence lawsuits. The big accounting firms get sued when they've been negligent. Basically, the rating agencies can't. I would suggest to you that if that First Amendment defense, which built up over the years through the courts, was taken away from the rating agencies, a lot of these complex securities, coming back to Bob's point about complexity in the system, would have never been issued in the first place because the rating agencies wouldn't have rated this stuff. It wouldn't have been created because investors wouldn't buy unrated securities. So when we start drilling down into underlying causes of the problem, we have to go down a number of layers to understand the incentives and the distortions that are out there in the marketplace, oftentimes created by public policy.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
let's a very quick response. You know, I said that a lot of the necessary remedies right now are outside polite Main Street conversation. I would make the rating agencies public institutions. Problem solved. Nobody may rate a security who is not a public institution. No problem. And
let me just say this so that everybody, including the viewers, are on the same page. The rating agencies, to all these high-cost loans, these difficult loans that have caused the American public the problem we have, 80% of them got AAA rated ratings. Sure. 80%. And who pays the agencies to rate these securities? Sure. But the very people who are bringing them these packages of securities. They say to Moody's and Fitch and S&P, please rate these, and let me get my checkbook out while you're thinking about what that rating is. I mean, this is essentially a fundamental flaw in the system, and you're suggesting that's more of a public mission to make sure that it's clean and not influenced by.
And the corruption was exactly analogous to the corruption of the accountants in the 90s, who were paid to sign off on bogus books. It was exactly analogous to the corruption of stock analysts who were paid to bless bad companies that their affiliates were providing underwriting services for. So I think drastic simplification and turning some private institutions that have been corrupted into public institutions, in some cases temporarily, in some cases like the rating agencies, permanently is what's needed.
That might also restore some investor confidence that they can believe in these ratings.
I feel compelled to respond.
Well, you're not Moody's anymore, right? I mean, technically.
No, but you should know, I'm not part of the rating agency.
Right.
I sold my company to Moody's, and I'm part of an independent subsidiary, and I can speak my mind.
Yes.
And I do, as you know, speak my mind.
And fortunately, you sold before the fall, and it's, which allows you to speak your mind.
And I got cash.
Even more so.
And I got cash.
That's what I'm saying.
And you should know, I started the company from zero.
Yeah,
so zero.
Entrepreneurship.
I had a credit card, by the way.
A credit card loan. I hope it didn't have abusive rates on it. That's all.
It was abusive at the time. It was very abusive.
We're trying to fix that. We're trying to fix that.
Right. I agree securitization was broken. I don't agree that it should be scrapped. I think it can be fixed. And I think it should be, because I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that securitization has allowed for a greater democratization of the availability of credit. That lower middle income households would not have gotten this higher home ownership rate without the process of securitization. Like many things, good things, it got abused and it broke. But it doesn't mean that the system can't be fixed, and it shouldn't be fixed. It should be. And the reason why credit is more available through securitization, it's a very simple idea, and it's true. You're able to break up risk and disperse it more widely and match it up with the people who are willing to take more risk and those that are willing to take less risk. And so you can therefore get more credit to people who otherwise would not have gotten credit. So it would be a mistake, I think, for you, for your organization, for everyone in this room, to scrap securitization. That's just, now, how do you fix it? How do you fix it? And by the way, the FHA securitizes everything, right? All FHA lending is securitized. It's good securitization. And the reason the kind of securitization, and by the way, securitization is broken not for the reason you think. The one you mentioned and you think is that it's corrupt, that the investor pays for the rating and therefore the rating is high. That, in my view, is not the reality of it. If it were, there would be a smoking gun that would be in the New York Times. They would have, you would have found the paper trail in the conversations, and you can't.
Well, there's a new attorney general. Maybe there will be a smoking gun.
And we'll see. But then the question is, why was it broken? Why was it broken? And there's a few reasons, and I'll just give you one. One is that the key one is that no one actually bore the risk of the underlying loan to a significant degree. It was so dispersed that no one felt like they had enough skin in the game. Therefore, they had to do the due diligence, whether it be the investor who actually bought the security, the pension fund in Cleveland, or the investment bank, or the lender, or the rating agent, or whomever it is. So it's to fix the process is you have to make sure that someone is bearing enough risk that they make a good loan. And there are good ideas. You know, covered bonds is a good idea. Covered bonds is a good idea, and that's the next. That's going to be born out of this. But so to paint securitization as bad is not in your best interest.
If you heard, by the way, Bonnie Frank is proposing that originators keep some skin in the game when they sell the loan, that they still have, maybe he's used the number of 10%.
That's a covered bond.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Yep. That's
So you think that's a good idea?
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, please. I want to go on to another topic, my favorite topic.
There are a lot of myths here. I mean, the home ownership rate by the mid-'60s was only 3 percentage rates below what it was at the subprime peak. And, you know, there are institutions like credit unions that were very good at providing credit to low and moderate income people. You do not need all of this convoluted complexity, that's a redundancy, to get credit to moderate income people. And they're the poster children for guys making zillions of dollars, taking a cut at every stage of this daisy chain. And I think if you're going to have it, absolutely have a skin in the game requirement and have transparency. But I think it ought to be drastically simplified if you're going to have it at all.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil. But I want to have some time for audience questions, and if you have a question, hold up your hand so we can get a mic to you. 111 right there.
Just 3 quick points about that. I think Mark's points about securitization, if the vehicle brings capital to the U.S. marketplace and specifically the housing market, and it can be done correctly with the appropriate balance, it still is a great tool for accessing capital. Second thing is, when I said regulation, you know, I really truly meant that there are gaps, so deep gaps in the regulatory environment where there are some entities that have not even been regulated. So we've got to find a level playing field for that. And the third thing I wanted to mention, back to Bob's point about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they operated the way they should have operated, you know, prior to, you know, the excessive leverage and the low capital, et cetera. Those institutions played a vital role in what we did in advancing home ownership in America, and could again if brought back to the same spot that they were, you know, when they were operating under the context that they were chartered.
May I just apologize to the panel and the audience because I have a plane to catch. So I'm going to have to duck out.
You said 3 o'clock, right?
Well, I know, but I'm just giving you an early warning.
Yes. Yes. But I'm gonna take up every bit of that 10 minutes between 3 to keep you here. Okay, so here's one thing I really want to get at before you do leave, Bob, and get others to weigh in. One of the things, I said this to a group of senators the other day, if you're going to pass laws and you're not going to have regulators or enforcement agencies enforce those laws, what's the point of passing them? And let's face it, since 1994, the Federal Reserve Bank had the authority to issue unfair and deceptive lending practices. Now, it's not like they didn't know. Even though we were in there and other organizations were in there and individuals were writing to them, telling them that these loans were problematic, they were abusive and so on, they are the ones who have the loan files. They have people who physically go into these financial institutions, open up the loan files, and can look far deeper and with far more detail than any of us could using the available data. And they still, from '94 through this malfeasant, abusive, greedy lending period that got us into trouble, which was 2001 to 2008, even during that period, they still never issued any rules that would have reined in the people that we've been talking about, that Phil is talking about as the unregulated institutions. They did not issue unfair and deceptive practices. And so these abuses continue to the point where it's brought the nation's economy to its knees. And so my question is, and by the way, that's just unfair and deceptive practices under the HOPA rules. Then there's CRA, there's the requirement that these institutions are supposed to make referrals to the Department of Justice when they see patterns and practices of discrimination, and as Gail pointed out earlier, disproportionate, and all the data and all the facts support it, disproportionate application of these high-cost loans to communities of color. During this period of time, no referrals from some of the agencies and very few from others. And the question is this: we can change the chairman of the Federal Reserve and we can change the head of the OCC and so on, but you've got this career bureaucracy in place that it doesn't seem, no matter who's in there, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and we'll see, Barack Obama, What do we have to do to get these people to protect the American consumer and enforce the consumer protections and the fair lending laws so these kind of abuses don't happen? I mean, so really, Ed, you want to jump in?
Two things. I mean, Congress needs to provide oversight, and to do that, you've got to break the stranglehold of the bank lobby.
You can't. I get 1 minute, please. 1 minute. 1 minute, please. Okay. Hang on, Ed. Hang on, Ed. Ted, come up for a second. This is the surprise special thing that's on the agenda that Bob doesn't know about. But, you know, come on in, Ted. This is Ted Wysocki.
In respect to Bob's flight schedule, I'll refrain from all the wonderful things I was going to say about his seminal books. Okay. But as chair of the award committee, I took the personal privilege. I first met Bob in May of 1975 when my boss, Gail Sincata, testified before his boss, Senator Proxmire. NCRC has created an award in Senator William Proxmire's name. Last year, in honor of 30 years of CRA, in memory, it was awarded to Gail Sincata. This year, I'm proud to announce that the award to the individual whose life's work exemplifies the spirit of Senator Proxmire's contributions to economic mobility, we'd like to award to Robert Kuttner.
Thank you. What? Oh. Thank you.
And a free box.
Do you want to say anything, Bob? Or, while your mic is still working?
We took it off.
Here, I'll hold that for you.
Well, that was worth staying for. Thank all of you so very, very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if Ted said it, but I didn't hear it. Bob wrote CRA. He wrote the act. Yeah. All right. So I apologize, Ed. You were.
Oh, no, I just said Congress needs to watch over the regulators, and groups like the NCRC and its members need to hold the banks and Congress accountable.
Okay. So why don't we try and get a few quick questions, and if you could, the more you can make them questions, and the shorter you can make them, the more folks we can get in. Jim.
You're starting off in the wrong direction with me. I have two questions, actually. They're really quick. First, to Mark, you, assuming you're right, Mark, about slow beginnings of a recovery early next year, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about the pay option arms that don't really begin to peak reset until next year and 2011? How does that play into your scenario? And then to Avis, I think where you were going was unemployment now is 8%, and the real fright is that it could go as high as 10%. But the fact is Latinos already experience unemployment in excess of 11, African Americans of 13, young black males almost, well, certainly over 20%, depending on what age groups you pick, 25% or even higher. And so those groups are already experiencing the deepest and darkest recession that we are even beginning to think about. And so I think you were getting at the idea of a generic recovery really doesn't capture it when so many groups are already knee-deep in a recession. They are feeling a depression. I'm just wondering if you have any other thoughts on that.
Okay, so that's an example of not a short question. But you, Mark, and then...
Well, as you know, the pay option arms, many of them were originated in 05 and 06. They're 5-year, and then they balloon out. And so that means in 2010 and 11, we're going to get a lot of adjustments to these loans. Just to give you context, there's probably $200 billion worth of these loans that will adjust in 2010 and another $200 billion in 2011. We have $11 trillion in mortgage debt outstanding. So it's not insignificant, but it's nothing. It's small in the context of subprime, Alt-A. I don't mean to suggest it's not an issue, but it's not as big an issue as the other problems that we've struggled with. Moreover, I I'm hopeful that some of these loans will be the loans that get into this modification plan, that they seem to be, if you look at the DTIs and the